Hi, my name is John, and this is my senior seminar interview. Today I'm going to be talking about an experience that happened to me in my junior year. Why did you choose this example? I chose this example because it had an impact on my life, and I didn't deal with the situation in the right way. What exactly happened? Okay, so it was the second season tryouts, and I didn't know what to try out for because the previous 3 years I had always tried out for basketball. But this year, all my friends were encouraging and telling me to do rugby. However, I was nervous and never played the game, and my only picture of the game was getting the crap taken out of you. And during the tryouts, I had too much fear in me to perform well, and I was dropping the ball and not making my tackles, and the coaches were analyzing me. Wow, and the fact that you never played rugby made you even more nervous about trying out? Yes, it did. Usually, when I try something that is unknown for me, I become nervous and don't want to do it. Whereas in Whereas when I'm familiar with something, I usually have no problem with it unless I just don't like it. So how did the tryouts end up going? They went terrible. I was overthinking too much about getting injured and if showing up was a stupid mistake, which impacted my ability to complete basic drills. Do you feel like you let your thoughts and emotions get to your head too quickly? Yes, I most certainly did. It sounds like the ways of knowing can be applied here. Do you think so? Yes. Two of the four ways of knowing affected me during the time of the situation. They were emotion and reason. Within emotion, there is a concept called emotional coloring. This is how our perception of things can be colored by strong emotions, and there is doubtless some truth in saying like love is blind and fear has many eyes. An example is that if you love someone, you are likely to be blind by their faults, whereas if you hate them, you will only see their faults. And isn't there a relation between reason and emotion? Yes. Both reason and emotion both reason and emotion are closely related to each other. Rather than think of reason and emotion as completely different either or things, it probably makes more sense to say that it is more or less a continuum of mental activity running from the very rational to the very emotional. When you are engrossed in a mathematics problem, you are at one of the continuum. When you lose your temper, you are at the other end. Most of the time, we are in the middle of the continuum with a mixture of feelings and thoughts. Hang on a minute. First, we should make it clear to the audience that ways of knowing is what affects our knowledge and how we obtain all knowledge. Yes, that's a good idea. And I'm going to be sharing how emotion and perception affected my knowledge of the situation and how I performed. Well, maybe this next question can help you demonstrate one of those two ways of knowing. Is there anything you could have done to make you perform better? Possibly. But that is really what I want to know, as well as which is, do my emotions affect my ability to perform well? So what you were saying is that when we are in situations when our emotions become overwhelming and we can't control them, they begin to destroy how we normally would act or make simple tasks hard ones. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And the knowledge claim is that we are able to control our reactions in new decisions that affect our emotions. All right, I think we have covered enough on what knowledge issues and claims are, so let's move on to more about emotion. Yes, back to emotion. What exactly is emotion? Emotion is one of the four ways of knowings. Emotion consists of the feeling inside you. They can be angry, frightened, happy, sad, surprised, and disgust. Most people can easily recognize these emotions when shown a photograph of someone's face with these emotions. Even if their appearance is different or someone else's, even babies who are physically impaired can show these emotions. This shows how our emotions are innate, which means they were born with our emotions rather than learn them. Another important concept is the emotion sequence. A good example of this is a first date. If you go on a first date and it is good and you were happy and had a fun time, you are likely to go further along with this relationship, maybe on a second date or eventually get married. Whereas if it was a bad date, then our emotions might become sad or disappointed, and you may be wondering if you did something wrong. So how does this relate to rugby? Well, the emotion sequence can be applied to rugby in that in the beginning I already came to rugby nervous and scared and thinking it was going to be a bad time. And so if I messed up on a simple drill in the beginning, my emotions would become bad and I would get mad, which would make me which would make my reasoning stupid. And what about James Land's theory on emotion? James Land's theory states that the emotions are essentially physical in nature, and bodily changes can come before and emotion cause emotional changes. In other words, what your body portrays is what your emotions will betray. For example, if you are slouched with your head down, you might be depressed. If you're standing up straight and have a smile, you might be happy, and vice versa. If you are happy and you are standing up straight and get rid of those physical features, then you won't feel happy anymore. Thank you for Thank you for that explanation on James Lance's theory. I feel like I have a good understanding of it now. How about reason? Ah, yes, reason. Quite simply, reason. Quite simply, reason we use to. Quite simply, we use reason to acquire new knowledge. There are two types of reasoning: deductive and inductive. And deductive can be a very poor way of reasoning. We are constantly using reason to go beyond the immediate evidence of our senses. So after we use our senses, which is part of perception, we then have our interpretation of whatever it is, and then use reasoning to find out more about it. An example of reasoning could be that in the morning the grass is wet, therefore you can conclude that it was raining in the night. Reason seems to give us certainty. Are you going to be using belief bias in your reasoning? Yes. So in that case, let me explain some more what belief bias is. Belief bias is the tendency we have to believe that an argument is valid simply because we agree with the conclusion. However, it is important to note that just because you agree with the conclusion does not mean that the argument for it is a good one. An example of belief bias is Democrats are favor of free speech, and since dictators are not Democrats, then dictators are obviously opposed to free speech. Thank you for elaborating on what belief bias is. Now back to emotion. Can our emotions be affected by more than just physical things? Definitely. In fact, James Lance's theory has been critiqued for being too broad, because sometimes the way we portray ourselves through our bodily emotions can show the full extent of what we are feeling. Can't show the full extent of what we're feeling. For example, if someone in your family passed away, you would feel incredibly depressed and mad and frustrated. However, despite having a sad face and crying and slumped up against the wall, that doesn't show the full extent of how sad we are. And so how did your emotions play a role when you were trying out for rugby? Well, during rugby trials, I was feeling much more worse than I actually showed. Although I wasn't performing well and had fear to play, what was going through my mind was actually a lot worse than what my body was showing. In my mind, I kept asking myself, why am I here? It's just a stupid mistake, and saying that rugby isn't for me. This is a part of the emotional feedback loop, which was explained earlier on as emotional sequence. In this case, it was a negative feedback loop. What about perception? Did you use belief bias during the tryouts? Definitely. In a way, I was narrow-minded because during the tryouts, I used belief bias as a way to convince myself I had a good argument not to be here and that it was pointless. I said that since I was a skinny guy, I was automatically going to get crushed at rugby. Therefore, all skinny guys would get crushed at rugby. When this argument is not really valid because there are plenty of skinny guys out there that are good at rugby. To conclude, both emotion and reason are very powerful in affecting our performance. My experience with rugby trials were a great example of how my emotions and reasoning affected my ability to perform well or even do simple tasks. Lastly, how does Yerkes-Dodson law apply to this? Well, the Yerkes-Dodson law is an empirical relationship between arousal and performance. The law states that the performance increases with physiological or mental arousal, but only up to a point. When level of arousal becomes too high, then performance decreases. So now that you know about your performance decreases when you become too excited or think too much about something, you can remember that and use it to make sure your performance doesn't decrease. Also, learning from your rugby experience and the knowledge you now have will be able to control your emotions and have better reasoning next time something occurs that you are unfamiliar with. Have we mentioned the KI and the KC? Yes. You have done a great and clear job of explaining the ways of knowing and the relevant theories that belong to the ways of knowing, and mentioned a knowledge issue and a knowledge claim. Well done.